Today's story from the Andrew Lang Blue Fairy book, Cinderella or the Little Glass Slipper. This story will be with commentary. Once there was a gentleman who married for his second wife the proudest and most haughty woman he had ever seen. She had, by a former husband, 2 daughters of her own humor, who were, indeed, exactly like her in all things. He had likewise, by another wife, a young daughter, but of unparalleled goodness and sweetness of temper, for which she took from her mother, who was the best creature in the world. That is one of the most confusing first paragraphs I have ever read. Okay, so Dad has Cinderella, Mary's stepmom, who has 2 girls of her own, and that's where we are. No sooner were the ceremonies of the wedding over, but the mother-in-law, I believe that might be a ye olde way of saying stepmother, because I do not believe there is a mother-in-law in this story as we know of mother-in-laws. The mother-in-law began to show herself in her true colors. She could not bear the good qualities of this pretty girl, and less because they made her own daughters appear more odious. This is written really strangely. Ye olde. She employed her in the meanest work of the house. She scoured the dishes, tables, etc. She scrubbed Madam's chambers and those of the Mrs. daughters. She lay up in a sorry garret upon a wretched straw bed, while her sisters lay in fine rooms with floors all inlaid upon beds of very newest fashion, and where they had looking-glasses so large they might see themselves full length from head to foot. Now, back in ye olde times, glass was very expensive, so to have a mirror from floor to basically your head or taller so you could actually see yourself was very impressive. The poor girl bore all patiently and dared not tell her father, who would have rattled her off, for his wife governed him entirely. So this is another case of really hot gold digger, wife. Basically, her father is a pushover. When she had done her work, she used to go to the chimney corner and sit down among the cinders and ashes, which made her very commonly be called Cinderwench. But the youngest, who was not so rude and uncivil as the eldest, called her Cinderella. However, Cinderella, notwithstanding her mean apparel, was 100 times handsomer than her sisters, though they were always richly very dressed. This is really, really confusing to read. I mean, we know the story of Cinderella. It was made popular by Disney, I want to say back in the 50s. I want to say Cinderella was in the 40s or 50s. But so far, this is written very confusingly. I do hope you're able to follow it along. I'm doing my best. In some of these sentences, there's like 12 commas after like almost every other word. It doesn't make any sense. It happened that the king's son gave a ball. Why don't we just say the prince gave a ball? And invited all persons of fashion to it. Our young misses were also invited, for they cut a great fine figure among the quality. I guess that means they were somewhere up there. They were mightily delighted at this invitation, and wonderful busy in choosing such gowns, petticoats, headcloths that might become them. This was a new trouble to Cinderella, for she who ironed her sisters' linens, plaited their ruffles. They talked all day long of nothing but how they should be dressed. For my part, said the eldest, I will wear my red velvet suit with French trimming. And I, said the youngest, shall have my usual petticoats, but then to make amends for that, I will put on my gold-flowered mantula, and my diamond stomach acre? Okay. Which is far from being the most ordinary one in the world. I'm going to guess that's like a diamond cover bun, sort of, maybe something to sort of cinch your stomach in. They sent for the best woman they could to get their hair done and their headdress and adjust their double pinnies. Oh my gosh. And they had blah 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 red brushes and patches from Mademoiselle de la Pouche. Cinderella, a French story. I'm starting to feel this is a French story. It probably is, and I just never paid attention to that until now. Cinderella was likewise called upon to be consulted in all of these matters, for she had excellent notions and advised them all well. For the best, nay, she offered the services to dress their heads, for which they were very willing she should do. As she was doing this, they said to her, "Cinderella, would you not be glad to go to the ball?" "Alas," she said, "you only jeer me, for it is not for such as I to go thither." It's hither, but there's a T, and so it's thither. "Oh, thou art in the right of it," they replied, "for it would make the people laugh to see Cinderwrench at the ball." Anyone but Cinderella would have dressed their heads awry, but she was very good and dressed them perfectly well. Then they were almost 2 days without eating, for so much they transported with joy. They broke above a dozen laces, trying to be laced up clothes, for they might have the finest and slenderest of shapes. And they were continually looking at their looking-glasses. At last the happy day came. They went to the court, and Cinderella followed them with her eyes for as long as she could, and when she had lost sight of them, she fell a-crying. Her godmother, who saw all her tears, asked her what was the matter. "Okay, godmother, this is the first mention of you, and you're just here. It's not like you magically appeared. You just watched Cinderella be abused this whole time and are now asking what's the matter? I'm just saying." "I wish I could. I wish I could." She was not able to speak the rest for being interrupted by tears and sobbing. This godmother of hers, who was a fairy. Okay, wait a minute. We're just throwing that in here. Her godmother, who was a fairy, said to her, "Thou wishest thou couldst go to the ball, is it not so?" "Yes," cried Cinderella with a great sigh. "Well," said her godmother, "be but a good girl, and I will contrive that thou shall go." She's been a good girl for way longer than I think most people would be. She then took her into the chamber and said to her, "Run into the garden and bring me a pumpkin." Cinderella went immediately and gathered the finest she could get and brought it to her godmother, not being able to imagine how this pumpkin could help her go to the ball. Her godmother scooped out all the insides, having nothing left but the rind, which done, she struck it with her wand, and the pumpkin was instantly turned into a fine coach gilded all over with gold. She then went to look into her mousetrap, where she found 6 mice, all alive, and ordered Cinderella to lift up the little trap-door, when, giving each mouse as it went out a little tap with her wand, the mouse was momentarily turned into a fine horse, which altogether made a fine set of 6 horses of beautiful mouse-colored dapple gray. Being at a loss for a coachman, "I will go and see," said Cinderella. "If there is never a rat in the rat trap, we may have a coachman." "Thou art in the right," replied her godmother. "Go and look." Cinderella brought the trap to her, and in it there were 3 huge rats. The fairy made a choice of one of the 3, for he had the largest beard. Rats have beards? And having touched him with her wand, he was turned into a fat, jolly coachman, who had the smartest whiskers eyes ever beheld. After that, she said to her, "Go into the garden," again, "and you will find 6 lizards behind the watering pot. Bring them to me." I'm not sure how she's going to catch 6 lizards, but okay. She had no sooner done so than her godmother turned them into 6 footmen, who skipped up immediately behind the coach, with their liveries all bedaubed with gold and silver, and clutched as close behind each other as they could, as if they had done nothing else their entire lives. The fairy then said to Cinderella, "When you see here an epicage fit to go to the ball with, are you not pleased with it?" "Oh, yes," she cried, "but must I go thither?" I'm saying it thither. "As I am in these nasty rags?" Her godmother only touched her with her wand, and, in the same instant, her clothes were turned into cloth of gold and silver, all beset with jewels. This done, she gave her a pair of glass slippers, the prettiest in the whole world. Not quite sure how many pairs of gold slippers exist in the world, but we'll take it. Being thus decked out, she got up into her coach, but her godmother, above all things, commanded her not to stay after midnight, telling her, at the same time, that if she stayed one moment longer, the coach would be a pumpkin, her horse mice, her coachman a rat, the footman lizards, and her clothes would become just as they were before. She promised her godmother she would not fail at leaving at midnight, and then she drove away, scarcely able to contain herself for joy. The king's son, who was told that a great princess whom nobody knew was come, ran out to receive her. Okay, so word travels fast. I mean, she's on the road to go there, and bam, the prince knows a princess is coming. I'm sorry. There was immediately profound silence as they left off dancing, and the violins ceased to play, so attentive everyone was to contemplate the singular beauties of the unknown newcomer. Nothing was heard but a confused noise of, "Ha! How handsome she is! Ha! How handsome she is!" The king himself, old as he was, could not help but watching her, telling the queen softly that it was a long time since he had seen so beautiful and lovely a creature. And it was at that moment the queen decided, I wonder if I can poison this guy and get away with it. All of the ladies were busied in considering their clothes and headdresses, that they might have made some next day after the same pattern. Oh, wait. So, hold on. That was a fancy way of saying they're trying to remember what she's wearing so they can have copies made, provided they can meet such fine material and able hands to make them. The king's son conducted her, the prince conducted her to the most honorable seat, and afterward took her out to dance with him. She danced so very gracefully, and they more and more admired her. Again, this is written terribly. A fine cotillion was served up, whereas the young prince ate not a morsel, so intently he was busied on gazing at her. She went and sat down by her sisters, showering them 1,000 civiltries, giving them part of the oranges and citrons which the prince had presented her with, which very much surprised them, for they did not know her. I mean, I get oranges are good, especially when they're in season. And considering the time period this was written, and oranges come from like South America, that was a pretty impressive, expensive fruit gift. While Cinderella was thus amusing her sisters, she heard the clock strike 11 3/4, whereupon she immediately made courtesy to the company and hastened away as fast as she could. Being got home, yes, that's what it says, being got home, she ran to seek out her godmother, and after having thanked her that she could not but heartily wish she might go to the next ball because the king's son had desired her. As she was eagerly telling her godmother whatever had passed at the ball, the two sisters knocked at the door, which Cinderella ran to open. "How long you have stayed!" she cried, gasping, rubbing her eyes and stretching herself as if she had just been woken out of a sleep. She had not, however, in any manner been sleeping since they had left for home. "If thou had been at the ball," said one of her sisters, "thou would not have been tired with it. They came hither, the finest princess, the most beautiful ever was seen with mortal eyes. She showered us 1,000 civiltries and gave us oranges and citrons." Cinderella seemed indifferent to the matter. Indeed, she asked them the name of that princess, but they told her they did not know it, and the king's son was very uneasy on her account, and would give all the world to know who she was. At this, Cinderella, smiling, replied, "She must then be very beautiful indeed. How happy you have been! Could not I see her? Ah, dear Miss Charlotte, do lend me your yellow suit of clothes, which you wear every day." So apparently one of the stepsisters is named Charlotte. "Ah, to be sure," cried Miss Charlotte. "Lend my clothes to such a dirty cinder wrench as thou art. I should be a fool." Cinderella indeed expected such an answer, and she was very glad for the refusal, for she would have been sad to put it on if her sister lent her what she was asking for jestingly. The next day the two sisters were at the ball, so apparently balls go on for more than one day. And so was Cinderella, dressed more magnificently than before. The king's son was always by her side and never ceased in his compliments and kind speeches to her, to whom all this was so far from being tiresome that she quite forgot what her godmother recommended to her, so that at last she counted the clock striking 12 when she took to be no more than 11. She rose up and fled, nimble as a deer. Your godmother didn't say, recommend you be home by midnight. She said, come home by midnight, 'cause all the magic's gonna go away. The prince followed, but could not overtake her, because she's as nimble as a deer. She left behind one of her glass slippers, which the prince took up most carefully. She got home, but quite out of breath, in her nasty old clothes, having nothing left of her finery but one of the slippers. Fell to that which she had dropped. The guards of the palace gate were asking, had they seen a princess go out? Who said, they saw no one go out but a young girl, very meanly dressed, who had an air of a poor country wench, than a gentlewoman. When the two sisters returned to the ball, Cinderella asked them if they had been well divided, and if the fine lady had been there. They told her, yes, but she hurried away immediately when it struck 12, and with so much haste she dropped one of her glass slippers, the prettiest in the world, which the king's son had taken up, and he had done nothing but look at her all the time at the ball, and was most certainly very much in love with such a beautiful person who owned the glass slipper. So far, all the prince really knows about her. She's dressed like she's rich, and she's hot. That seems to be good enough. When they said very true, for a few days after the king's son caused it to be proclaimed by the sound of trumpet that he would marry her whose foot the slipper would just fit. They, whom he employed, began to try it upon princesses, and then duchesses, and then all the court, but in vain. It was brought to the two sisters, who did all possible to thrust their foot into the slipper, for they could not affect it. How tiny is the slipper? Or how large is the slipper? Cinderella, who saw this and knew her slipper, said to them laughing, let me see if it will not fit me. Her sisters burst out a-laughing, and began to banter her. The gentleman who was sent to try the slipper on looked earnestly at Cinderella, and, after finding her very handsome, said, but it was just that she should try, and he had orders to let everyone make a trial. He obliged Cinderella to sit down, and putting the slipper to her foot, he found it went on very easily, and fitted her as if it had been made of wax. The astonished her two sisters, who were in excess great, the astonishment of her two sisters was excessively great, and still abundantly greater when Cinderella pulled out of her pocket the other slipper and put it on her foot. Thereupon in came her godmother, who, having touched her wand to Cinderella's clothes, made them richer and more magnificent than any of those before. So the godmother comes in, makes her prettier, pretty clothes. The footman and her two stepsisters see this, and no one starts screaming, kill the witch. I'm just saying it's the time period that happens, and that happens in other stories in here. Let me see. Now the two sisters found her to be that fine, beautiful lady whom they had seen at the ball. They threw themselves at her feet and begged pardon for all the ill treatment they made her undergo. Cinderella took them up, and she embraced them, crying that she forgave them with all her heart and desired them to always to love her. She was conducted to the young prince, dressed as she was. He thought her more charming than ever, and a few days after married her. Cinderella, who was no less good than beautiful, gave her two sisters lodging in the palace. The very same day matched them with two great lords of the court. The end. And again, that is the version of Cinderella from the Andrew Lang The Blue Fairy book. Side notes. After just the first mention of the stepmother, we don't really mention the stepmother again, just the stepsisters. Other versions of the story from around this time period say that the stepsisters tried to cut off parts of their feet to make them fit into the glass slippers, but they were found out from the sloshing sound of blood, and Cinderella just forgiving them, setting them up in the palace, and then matching them with two great lords of the court so they will become ladies. This is sort of a dissatisfying ending, I guess you could say, because there's no justice. Yay, Cinderella got to marry a prince, but looks like her mean stepsisters are going to get off pretty scot-free too. I mean, they weren't hideous, but they did make her basically do all the work and make a lot of fun of her. So anyway, that was Cinderella from the Blue Fairy book by Andrew Lang, and that was the live reading with commentary. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.